Sporting Journal Radio, presented by Onyx.
We're back. Thanks for tuning in on this radio station right here by streaming this on demand at sportingjournalradio.com. Maybe you downloaded it or maybe you're watching it on YouTube. Thank you very much. Recently, we spent some time in Branson, Missouri, and we hadn't been down there. I hadn't been down in that part of the world since I was real little before I could really remember anything. But we had a great time. We got to fish Table Rock. We got to hang out with a bunch of really cool outdoor enthusiasts who are also creators in this world as part of the AGLOW Conference, the Association of Great Lakes Outdoor Riders. Met a lot of really cool new people, and that's where we kicked off a new job for Dan and I as communications. Do we remember what the title of this is? A communications team, communications director, communications arm of AGLOW, something like that.
King, I think.
King, yes, the communications king for AGLOW. And our next guest here on the show is a communications director for Roeslein, and we're going to learn a little bit about what Roeslein is, what they're doing, because to me it seems like they're kind of the forefront in the agricultural world as far as renewable energy as well. They're kind of doing some innovative things, and we're going to find out all about that right now with Brandon Butler. Brandon, thanks for coming on the show.
I really appreciate you guys having me. The Prairie sportsman for a company that's doing prairie restoration makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, on the TV show, we talk about prairie restoration all the time and conservation and the benefits of grasses, and not just for wildlife, but clean water and everything else. And we'll talk about more about that coming up a little bit later. But first of all, it was good to hang out with you a little bit down there in Branson. That was a good time this year.
It was. I have made the last 13 conferences in a row. I'm a past president of AGLOW. It's an organization that I believe a lot in, and very excited to see new folks like you guys and quite a few others coming into the fold and taking leadership roles. Excited to have you guys doing the communication stuff.
We're looking forward to it, and it's interesting. You know, I've had a lot of long phone calls with Mark Smith lately, and he brought up you as an example as somebody about that you don't always know who is going to all of a sudden join AGLOW and really hit it off, and it's going to benefit you, it's going to benefit me, it's going to benefit a lot of people. And he brought up you as an example of how things kind of changed for you a little bit when you joined AGLOW.
Well, I started off freelance writing back in 2006, and it's never to this day been my full-time income, but I think the freelance work I've done has benefited and impact every professional position I've had. And I've been able to move up through a number of positions, executive director of a nonprofit, back into the corporate world that has a conservation slant to it as well. So those communication skills, even if they're not your primary duty, they sure do help in no matter what it is you're doing.
Well, it's just a great way to just meet people, get story ideas, see some cool places, enjoy some unique outdoor opportunities. And we have no fun at those conferences either. It's never a good time. It's always a good time. So from AGLOW and all those other things that you've done now with Roeslein Alternative Energy, what is Roeslein? How long ago did you start with them?
I've been with Roeslein just about 4 years. I've known Rudy Roeslein, the founder, quite a bit longer. This is his second major company to start. He has a parent company, if you will, called Roeslein and Associates that has constructed most of the aluminum beverage can manufacturing facilities on the planet. Wow. He likes to say if you've drank out of an aluminum can, there's about an 85% chance it came off a Roeslein assembly line. So he's a very dedicated conservationist, has quite a bit of hunting property of his own, two places in Missouri, one a couple thousand acres up on the Iowa border, one down in the Ozarks, and wanted to spend his remaining years doing something that really gives back to the environment, gives back to wildlife and habitat that's brought him so much joy. But he wanted to do it through a market-based approach. And Rudy has a really interesting start in life. He was an immigrant when he was 8 years old after World War II. He had been living in displacement camps in Europe and made it over to St. Louis, became successful in pretty much everything he's done. But he's never lost his European ties and spends time over there doing business, and realized that anaerobic digestion of waste products in agriculture were already producing energy at a common scale in Germany and other progressive countries. So having bought this land in northern Missouri with quite a few Smithfield farms around, there's actually 9 farms up there that produce about 2 million pigs per year. He thought there'd be a way to bring that technology to Missouri, and he founded Roeslein Alternative Energy a little over 10 years ago just to do that. And today we've got 83 lagoons covered in North Missouri alone. We've done projects in a number of other states as well. We've moved into Iowa, but we're in a joint venture with Smithfield Foods, the largest hog producer on the planet, and an investment firm called TPG. And that JV is called Monarch Bioenergy, where we come into these large scale farms, we tarp over the manure lagoons, we capture the greenhouse gases that would otherwise be going into the atmosphere, contributing to climate change, especially methane, which is one of the most dangerous. We take that methane and we upgrade it to renewable natural gas and inject it directly into the natural gas grid. We call that Horizon 1. But what I'm really excited to talk to you guys about is Horizon 2.
All right. Well, I do want to just touch on that real quick, just to, you explained it very well there, but I just want to give people a chance just to wrap their brains around that if they haven't heard of this before. So first of all, you hear about methane being bad all the time, and that's one of the arguments. Oh, we need to stop, having all this cattle on the landscape out there because it's releasing all this methane gas. Well, this essentially solves that problem, right? You're capturing all that methane and turning it into a renewable energy that we can use, and you're doing it by having this lagoon with the manure or the waste, and then you're just covering it, right? Removing the oxygen and then collecting the gases as that waste breaks down.
That's exactly right. It's a pretty simple process that nature does most of. So in every one of the barns, you've got approximately 1,000 hogs. There's 8 barns per lagoon. So you've got hogs that are growing up to about 255 pounds. All they do is eat and go to the bathroom. And that manure, that manure is, it goes through a slotted floor. It's scraped. And recycled water is used to flush it into that lagoon that you see there that's covered. As nature breaks down those solids, the gases are released. Like I said, historically, they'd go into the atmosphere, contribute in a number of negative ways to our environment. Climate change, the odor coming off of those lagoons for anybody that lives downwind on any given day, the opportunity for spillage. Rainfall is about 1 million gallons per lagoon per year that needs fossil fuel energy to be cleaned before it can be land applied. We stop that from happening. There's all kinds of environmentally and ecologically beneficial reasons this is great. It's also great economically. We have created essentially a new market in agriculture. People often hear about, read about, see about all the urban decay, the way our cities are falling apart in certain areas, South Chicago, East St. Louis. But you don't hear as much about the small towns throughout the heartland that were once booming and thriving. And now you drive through and it's boarded up town squares, crumbling over buildings, closed medical clinics. There hasn't been very much innovation in those communities. And now that we're bringing biogas, renewable natural gas production to agriculture and creating this whole other side of a farmer's potential, we're able to keep guys and gals on their home farms where they want to live, around their family, and they can have high-paying technical jobs.
And this isn't geographically specific. I mean, this could work. I mean, obviously you're in Missouri, but when we're talking about farmers in Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Dakotas, Iowa, this is kind of ground zero for this type of operation, isn't it?
Absolutely. So on the manure only side, it's already happening in quite a few other states, most states, New England, all the way to California. California is big. We're actually credited for our gas by the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard. So people are often, well, how do you put gas into a pipeline in Missouri, but it gets to California? Well, It never does. But we get monitored for how much we're putting in, and that's still calculated to offset diesel use. So the renewable energy that we're making from a waste product that would otherwise be damaging is offsetting the use of another product that is also environmentally damaging, which is fossil fuel based petroleum products.
Well, and the bottom line is people can make. You're essentially it's financially feasible to do this. Like money's the biggest motivator, right? And if you can show these guys, these producers, that they can make money or not lose money and also be benefiting the environment at the same time, it's a win for everybody. And so this is, I think that's, always the name of the game is showing people that they can that it makes sense financially at the same time.
It does, but it only at a large scale at this point. The industry's it's certainly still in its infancy. You're starting to see companies like Shell, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, like all the big oil and gas companies are moving into this space. 5 years ago, they weren't attending any of the Renewable Natural Gas Coalition conferences or American Biogas Council conferences, but they're all there now. These conferences continue to sell out. People talk about this as if it's a new gold rush. And, people are trying to gobble up the biggest players, but there's so many small farms that can benefit from this once the technology becomes affordable enough at a smaller scale to be implemented. If you guys know a real smart engineer, the three of us could become billionaires if we could figure out how to make this applicable to your home. Like if you go on Amazon right now, you can find these like blow up tent digesters for $600 that go in your backyard. I wouldn't suggest that. There's a lot of dangers with flammable gas. But the idea of us being able to take our grass clippings, our food waste, our human waste, and put it into a centralized digester in our backyard or in a community that shares one and then returns power to the house off your own waste, that's where we're headed in the future.
Yeah, I think that is exactly right. It is where we're headed. More renewable sources that make sense, is definitely the direction we need to go. And while this is all fascinating and good for the environment, let's talk about how this is going to how Roeslein is benefiting wildlife and get into the prairie restoration. So that's Horizon 2 that you were going to bring up?
Yeah, that's right. So Roeslein was just awarded one of the top 14 grants from the USDA Climate Smart Commodities Partnership grants. So essentially the USDA offered up $1 billion to be applied for. The requests were so overwhelming that they actually got 20 billion in requests and upped the give to 2.8 billion. 14 grants fell in the top level of 70 million to 95 million, with Roeslein being awarded $80 million. We have 14 partners, including Iowa State, University of Missouri, University of California, Davis, Smithfield, a number of the commodity groups like the Iowa Soybean Association and the Nature Conservancy. We've had support from Quail Forever, Pheasants Forever, NWTF. It's been remarkable. We put an unbelievable proposal together and we're awarded that $80 million, which will afford us the opportunity over 5 years to restore 100,000 acres, 50,000 of cover crops, 50,000 of prairie. And of course, that prairie is going to be incredible habitat for quail, pheasants, all upland nesting birds, all other wildlife. Unfortunately, we continue to see the decline of the monarch, hopefully by bringing back the prairie, which is the most decimated landscape in North America. Tallgrass prairie has less than 0.1% of its virgin stand remaining. And we're going to have an opportunity to restore, hopefully, millions of acres over time. But through this grant, we'll be able to get the first 100,000 acres on the ground, prove out the concept of being able to sustainably harvest that, and then putting it into our digesters mixed with manure as a feedstock for renewable natural gas production.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of break that down just a little bit, because immediately when I hear about incentives for putting grass on the ground, I think of the CRP program. So I was trying to figure out what the difference is between that and this and how it's going to work. And obviously with CRP, you're not out there really, you're not harvesting the grass, you're planting grasses for wildlife, but also for soil health and water quality and things like that. But this program allows you're actually going to harvest some of this grass out there.
Yeah, so the week before we were in a glow, I was in D.C. meeting with congressmen and senators, lobbying for a small change in CRP management. So currently, if you're enrolled in CRP, you have to manage that land.
Right.
It's not like you just plant it and let it go for 10 years. You have to burn it, you have to mow it, you have to do something. The hang up is you can't make additional revenue off of it if you're getting the incentive for being in the program from the government. With the exception of in severe drought conditions, it can be harvested and used for hay for cattle. Well, my argument is the government continues to look for opportunities to create renewable energy to lower our carbon footprint. And we've got 22 million acres of feedstock available. So if CRP has to be burned, if it has to be mowed, and we don't want to change the time frame or the amount, we're talking about taking 1/3 of the stand every 3 years in a rotational way, then let's allow that CRP to be harvested and put into digesters to create renewable energy. We've got 22 million acres now. I think the max allotment of CRP historically was 37 million. It's never been achieved. We know we can get back up above 25 million. And if farmers, landowners can take those marginal acres, those acres that shouldn't be planted in corn or soybeans, but are because they don't have any alternative revenue sources, and can make additional income off of CRP land by also being in the carbon market, by sequestering carbon in their soil and being credited for that, for protecting our waterways with Prairie CRP and being credited for that, and then being able to harvest that CRP and sell it to us or a company like us who can then turn it into renewable natural gas, then the economics work out in favor of the farmer and the landowner, and society benefits from the renewable energy produced.
So should that happen, how does a farmer, they essentially, they would be able to harvest that grass and then transport it to one of your facilities, or how do you foresee that happening? How would that work?
Yeah, that's how it would work, but it's going to take a while. So as I said, we're right now building the very first grass and manure mixture capable digester in Scott County, Iowa, at the Seavers family farm by Davenport. We've got a number of gas purification sites across northern Missouri, 8 of them, one in Iowa at this point. We talked about other states earlier. That we've done work in Wisconsin, New Mexico, Texas, Kansas, California. But for this to be feasible, for it to work, a couple of things have to happen. First, the EPA has to clear a pathway for prairie plants and cover crops to be digested and turned into gas. It's just kind of a fix in the language. Cellulosic material has been turned into RNG for a long time. So we're kind of waiting on that. And then we've got to be able to be in proximity of a gas purification skid to make it worthwhile to make the gas without being discounted too much credit for the diesel we would have to use to transport it to the facility. So the low carbon fuel standard, it calculates the value of your gas based on a number of inputs. So how much carbon is used to produce your gas, how much transportation is required to get your gas into the system, and how is your gas ultimately used. So as companies work towards like carbon neutral or carbon negative or just carbon reductions, our company is already producing carbon intensity scores of about negative 450. Wow. Negative 452 is our lowest. And that's because almost no carbon is used in making our gas, because gravity and recycled water push it into the lagoon. Nature takes over. A little bit of electricity is used to move the gas from under the cover to the purification spot and then into the pipeline. But if you start moving gas in tanks, or if you're having to add a lot of diesel usage or move your gas far away, then that'll lower your score because of the carbon that you're using to produce your gas. So it's a chess game of, you got to move one piece and make sure you're moving the right pieces. But eventually there's going to be a lot more gas purification skids all over the Midwest and the country. So hopefully farmers will be able to enroll as it becomes viable in their neighborhood.
So is this something where you'd be digesting the grass and manure, or one or the other?
Together. So at that, so it'll be a percentage base, but a higher percentage of grass. Cover crops are going to be a big part of this. So the prairie is part of it, but the number of cover crops are significantly higher than the prairie. So cover crops I wish I could remember the statistic, but it's less than 15% of row crop land goes into cover crops currently. And that's just because it doesn't work out economically for the farmer. They're wanting to plant cover crops because it holds their soil in place. It slows erosion, it stops runoff, and it builds new, healthier soil. But economically, they're just barely getting by. So if we can now say, go ahead and plant your cover crops, you're going to get X amount for the benefits that you're providing as far as soil erosion and runoff protection. But also, we're going to buy those cover crops from you by the ton and feed them into our digester. Then it becomes a no-brainer for the farmer to plant cover crops because it's a secondary. They're going to make two crops off their farm and 2 payments per year instead of 1.
Yeah. So you're looking at, so if a farmer's listening right now and maybe he's got grass on private land, could he could take that and start selling that to you now, right? I mean, that's if you guys had that program, if you were ready to take some.
If he lived in Southeast Iowa or Northwest Missouri.
And then down the line, then if somebody says this is something I wouldn't mind getting into in the future, what are you telling those guys?
Future's coming. It's going to take a while for this to spread out. Hopefully, this 5-year grant proves how viable this is, and it's an open market. So once it proves viable, I suspect we'll have competition, and it'll start spreading.
And then you would just tell them if they've got some marginal land that they're struggling to grow corn and beans on, could be a potential place for a cover crop or prairie restoration there, that they could essentially plant if it's prairie grasses that are coming up year after year, you're essentially planting it once and then being able to harvest that every so often. And it's a way to make money off land that you may be struggling to make money off of otherwise.
That's exactly right. In those marginal lands, it would be prairie. And when you factor, your return, you have to factor the input costs. So if you're saving on gas and time, tractors and labor by not having to plant and harvest, you have to factor that into your equation as well. You might not make as much per acre as you would on corn in those marginal acres, but when you do all the math and take out all those inputs, you're probably going to come out ahead in the prairie game.
What else? So if somebody says, yeah, I like this, how can they help to move this forward to make it more of a possibility in the future?
Well, it's just going to be, I think a lot of farmers still rely on, talking to their neighbor over the fence. Mm-hmm. It's going to take, word of mouth. No ads in magazines, no radio shows with me on it are going to change all these farmers' minds. But
except for this one.
When Farmer Smith enrolls and his neighbor finds out, how he afforded that brand new tractor, and he's like, you got to check this out. It works. And then, once that starts happening and they start talking amongst themselves, then I think we'll see a significant advancement in this technology.
This Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities, that's new, right? And then where did that money come from? And then is that something that anybody can, any producer can apply for every year, or is it a 5-year? Is it a one-time only? What's that program about?
Well, this was a one-time only for now. It's a first-time program that came from the USDA. It's being administered through NRCS. And as I said, I listened to Secretary Vilsack, United States Ag Secretary, when he announced it. And he said, we were hoping that we would get $1 billion in asks. We put $1 billion out there. We didn't know if there'd be enough ask for that. Well, they got 20 billion in ask, and they ended up giving out 2.8 billion. So there's a lot of innovation going on in agriculture right now. There's a lot of people looking for opportunities to move forward. So I suspect that this type of granting program will persist in the future. Another one just came across my desk for there's 500 million, I believe, for organic fertilizer, like domestic made fertilizer, because of the supply chain issues, which we're looking at doing that as well. That's part of our initial grant. We're going to be extracting ammonia from these manure legumes and making organic fertilizer from this waste stream as well.
I never really imagined having a half-hour interview about manure being so interesting here on the show. But this stuff's, I mean, it's kind of fascinating because I think it is the way of the future. And we have to find ways, especially when we're talking about using the land, we have to find ways to use the land the right way. Not saying it's not being used the right way now, but we're going to have to constantly make it better, particularly when you talk about soil health and water quality and things like that. And of course, for me, wildlife habitat is what really hits close to home for me. So I love prairie restoration stories, and especially when you can take something that's been considered waste and turn it into energy. And like anything else, when things change, it always is going to be expensive at first. But if it makes sense and people like it, the cost will come down on it, and it'll eventually become a way of life, and everybody will get used to it. It just might take a while. So all this stuff is fascinating.
Well, I appreciate you letting me talk about manure for 30 minutes. It's definitely better than when you're trying to give a sponsored presentation at a breakfast or a lunch.
Everybody's eating.
What's interesting is I share that affinity for wildlife and habitat that you have. I mean, that's been my whole life. And I spent 5 years prior to this job as the executive director of the Conservation Federation of Missouri, so the state's largest affiliated conservation organization. And when I left to go to work for this company, some people found out I was going to be doing work with these large CAFOs, large-scale livestock production, and they thought, I'd totally turned on them. How could you go from conservation to, large-scale agriculture? And I think it's amazing how much progression we're seeing in agriculture, the efforts that they're making to be better. And I've really found it enjoyable to help push that envelope, and also to share the stories and give credit where credit is due, because we wouldn't be able to do this if it wasn't for the cooperation and partnership with Smithfield. They're looking for ways all the time to make improvements in their processes. And by covering these lagoons and producing renewable energy, they're also doing prairie restoration on the acres that they own in North Missouri. So there's a lot of agriculture organizations out there that have gotten a black eye over the years that are, in need of a little pat on the back, I think, for a lot of the work that they've been doing to make their processes drastically better. And I'm enjoying being part of that.
Yeah, Minnesota's had its fair share of farmer bashing over the years, and there's definitely a lot of farmers out there that are doing what they can to make do what's best for the land and best for the wildlife, and do some best practices on the farm for conservation and land stewardship. So they don't always get the recognition that they deserve at times. So.
No, I mean, there's a bad apple in most baskets, but for the most part, you want to show me somebody who loves the land, introduce me to a farmer.
That's exactly right. I mean, they're the ones out there living on it and in it every day, pretty much.
That's right.
It's their livelihood. All right, Brandon. Well, what else do you want to say about Roeslein, or what do you want people to know, or where can we find out more information about all this?
But just that we're very dedicated to conservation. That's a role that I enjoy leading at the company. We're big supporters of Pheasants and Quail Forever, National Wild Turkey Federation, the Nature Conservancy. We just made a $1 million donation to the Missouri Prairie Foundation. Rudy and I both sit on the board of the Iowa Wildlife Federation. We're big supporters of the Conservation Federation, National Wildlife Federation. So we're a renewable energy production company that's made up of a bunch of engineers and hunters and anglers who love the land and love the landscape, and are working with agriculture to hopefully make our country a better place, make the world a better place, and take care of all the critters that we know about and the ones that we don't know about, because there's tens of thousands of species of birds and insects and minnows that are in peril that you've never heard of. We know about deer, quail, pheasants, turkeys, all the big game that we hunt, but there's so much wildlife to be taken care of that you've never heard of, and Prairie really can help in a big way. So hopefully this takes off, and we'll bring those ecological services and wildlife benefits to renewable energy production.
No, this is great. See, this is what I love about a Glow, because I'm sure I would have heard about you eventually, but I hadn't until we're eating breakfast and you're talking about cow manure or pig.
It was lunch
or lunch, yeah, whatever it was. But no, this is great. Keep up the good work there, and keep us updated. Let's do this again, and kind of keep us updated on the progress and how things are going, and what's happening down the line.
Will do. You going to the governor's pheasant hunt
down in Worthington? I sure am. You coming?
I just got my invitation.
Oh, there you go.
Right. Oh. So, yeah, I'm coming. I'm excited, man.
Perfect. Good. Well, we'll see you down there.
Yeah.
And
so the name is Roeslein, but it's spelled Roeslein, and then Alternative Energy. So Roeslein Alternative Energy.
Yeah, I had to practice that.
Yeah, it's nobody ever gets it right. But you can't convince the founder to change the name when it's his name.
It doesn't matter. And honestly, once you realize it's Roeslein, it's easy. Like, it's easy to say, and then just once you realize how to say it, that it's spelled differently. But once you realize how to say it, it's easy enough at that point. Roeslein. Very good. Brandon Butler, Communications Director, Roeslein Alternative Energy. Thanks for the time today on the show.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Hear more at sportingjournalradio.com or wherever you get podcasts. 852 million acres of public land, 147 million private properties, all in the palm of your hand. The #1 hunting GPS app just got better. With hundreds of custom map layers, 3D and topographic maps, you can easily scout on the road or at home before you go. And now you can get important weather details, CWD detection, and even know what crops have been planted where. Get the most trusted hunting GPS app ever made. OnX. Know where you stand with OnX.